go. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to our second Montessori morning of the 21-22 school year. We are going to be talking about absorbent mind today. This is sort of a theory that Maria Montessori came up with. She has a whole book around it, The Absorbent Mind. Again, it can be pretty deep reading. I remember the first time I picked it up, I thought, yeah, I'm not ready for this, because she literally starts with like the embryo, and how the absorbent mind really starts in embryo. But as we know, Maria Montessori was a medical doctor. And so I like the fact that she brings in some of those aspects into her educational theory. So the absorbent mind is the mental state that the child has in the first plane. The first plane is a child who is from 0 to 6. So another one of our Montessori mornings will be about the 4 planes of development. I was actually just speaking with Miss Rachel about the 4 planes and how they really drive everything we do in the classroom, and how we even physically set up our classrooms to really tap into a child's where they are in that plane of development. So anyway, the absorbent mind is in that first plane of development from 0 to 6. So in that stage, human beings have no instincts. And so the child has no instincts to support their life. That being said, the child learns just by living, just by existing. And that's that term, absorbent mind, is that they pick up everything through their senses and everything in the environment. So if you think about it, from 0 to 6, it is such a huge span, and it's a great time of development, whether it's movement. When we think about movement, we think about, a baby first holding up head, then maybe turning over, crawling, walking, and we do all of that really within a span of a year. And how fast that can go in that year. So we acquire that movement really from 0 to 1 or 0 to 2. We acquire our language, no matter how complex it is. We absorb the language that we are exposed to and that we absorb in our environment. And I always think about that. That's why acquisition of language, a second language, should always be, in my opinion, brought on in the child's first plane as early as possible, because that's when it's so easy for a child to acquire that. So if and when we get a second language added to Goodland Montessori, I intend to start it in the early grades, because that sort of fits with our Montessori theory. And you also think, no matter how complex that language is, Chinese, Mandarin, which we may think as adults is complex, they pick it up so easily because that's what they're absorbing and used to in their environment. Intelligence, they also pick up intelligence and become a distinctive individual without being taught. And so what she says is that during this period, the child absorbs all the impressions in the environment without effort, without judgment, or without conscious memory. They are in the process of forming their personalities. All the impressions in the environment becomes part of who they are. And so you've probably heard that before, that a child's personality is pretty much determined by 3 or 4. So that's why it is so important to have positive things, positive exposure in their environment in this first plane of development. And like we talked about, within 6 years, they can walk, talk, and communicate. That first plane is just a great area of growth. Does anyone have any questions so far? Okay. Oops. I love this quote. So our work as adults is not to teach. but to help the absorbent mind in its work of development. Montessori says her term for teachers is actually director or directress, um, because I think she kind of taps into this theory right here, right? So we are directing where we want that absorbent mind to pick up things instead of teaching. The absorbent mind is the teacher, if that makes sense. We are not. We're just directing what we want that mind to absorb. A child's learning is different than adults. They do not block out any elements, whether positive or negative. They do not discriminate in the absorption. Adults need strong will to challenge ourselves, and it takes self discipline to learn as adults, right? And this is where, again, that absorbent mind comes in. It comes in without discrimination. So it's a little easier for children to learn in that time period. Um, and the child does not get tired of learning in this plane. She also talks about the absorbent mind performs an essential function in helping children to learn. A child adapts to his time, place, and culture, like I talked about. The child is in the process of becoming a member of society. All human beings become a unique person. We are not born with culture or language, of course, just potential. And there is no limitation to the possibility of our adaptation. And so, we've been talking in education a lot about trauma lately. And again, the absorbent mind does not discriminate. And so when we're talking about trauma, I think about the absorbent mind and how if the child is seeing negative things that we perceive as negative in the environment, that sort of becomes normal. And we'll talk about it later in the year, but when we have non-normalization of students, a lot of that negative absorption obviously affects us later in life. Any questions? Okay. So the absorbent mind refers to the mind's capacity to take in information and sensations from the world that surrounds it. So 0 to 3, so we're going to break it down a little more, is the unconscious period of formation. So obviously they don't know that they're taking in everything, right? So working of the mind is hidden. We see it when they start talking and moving, right? So when they start moving, we can really see what they're drawn to, maybe what they've been looking at over the past, few months of their growth. When they start talking, we can really get a sense of what they are seeing in their environment. And again, they're not aware of what they're learning. They do not try to memorize. That is subconscious. It's just a part of how that brain works. And they cannot pull it out or retrieve it from 0 to 3. So 3 to 6 is the conscious period of formation. That's when their conscious starts to develop. We increase that through activities, hence our primary classroom and starting children at the age of 3. Their will develops at the age of 3. My daughter probably started her will at the age of 2. They become aware of his or her accomplishments. They become very proud of the work that they accomplish. They can follow directions more and more in this 3 to 6 year old conscious period of formation. And they should have choice in decision making. And again, this is why we set up our primary room. It's all about choices and following that interest. Any questions? Okay, so the tiny child's absorbent mind finds all its nutriment in its surroundings. So it adapts obviously to time, place, and culture. It can adapt to a child can adapt to any customs, language, social values, food, right? The way you eat, the way you greet someone. So when I give parents a tour, practical life is the area that we teach, like spooning. But if you were to go to a Montessori classroom in another culture, they may have different instruments that they use that pertain to their culture. And that's, practical life. We set that up in a way that is, pertaining to the culture that we are in. The way you greet someone typically, before COVID, we would do a handshake when students enter. Again, if you were in another part of the world, they may do a bow or, whatever is culturally appropriate there. They learn language he is exposed to, no matter how complex. We talked about that before. As technology advances, they adapt to those circumstances. And boy, have we seen that over the past, 10, 20 years. We can see, sometimes you see a 1-year-old with a phone or a tablet, and they know how to work those a lot more than we do, because it's just what is part of their environment now, and they have absorbed how to use those. I was at a friend's house, and she has a 3-year-old, and she has one of those motorized cars, and she was, of course, driving around in the car talking on her phone. And I'm like, this is, it's just what she absorbs in her environment. It was cute. So they are born with possibilities, but they need to observe it in their environment, right? So here's where that positive, we need to really make sure we're giving them positive instances in their environment to absorb. Movement and intellect work in harmony. And this is another theory that we put in place into all of our classrooms, is that students have the ability to move as they should. It's one of our human tendencies, as Montessori would call it. And so they have that freedom to move in their school environment. As the reasoning mind develops, the absorbent mind stops reasoning mind. Oh, that doesn't make sense. So as the reasoning mind develops, the absorbent mind stops. And the reasoning mind develops, what is that? So anyway, so as the reasoning mind, what I meant there was, once that reasoning mind starts, then the absorbent mind stops. And hence the 0 to 3 is the, subconscious, and 3 to 6 is the conscious formation. Any questions? Okay, so for us as teachers and parents, what is our role in that, right? Well, we have a huge role in what we place in front of our children when they have this absorbent mind from 0 to 6 in that first plane. So the child is very fragile, of course. They depend on us for everything in their first few years of life. And so the feeling of safety is very important for them, as it is, as adults as well. But again, as we're seeing, more trauma-related talk, not feeling safe can really put learning on a back burner, because they need to feel that safety first, if that makes sense. If you don't feel safe in an environment, that's where, your mind is less able to pick up things positively from the environment, because you're always thinking about your safety first, if that makes sense. They need to feel deep and consistent love from people around them. Also, just being aware of their absorbent mind, of course, with language we use, I've had 3-year-olds in my classroom, saying some inappropriate words, and they say it often, appropriately. And, do they know what they're saying, and that maybe we think of it as a culture as negative? No, they just absorbed it in their environment, and they're using it like any other word that they have seen. So we need to be aware that what they are seeing and what they are hearing, they are absorbing all of that. Also, we need to give them an environment that allows movement even as babies, as they then begin to explore, we need to give them that area to move and explore. We also should be using very rich language in our parent education nights. Next week, we're doing practical life, but when we get to language, I always talk about how important it is to use big words. Sometimes I think people think, oh, we're not going to use that, but complex language around our children, but we should be, right? So then that equips them to know the language and then to explore with that. And then eventually when they become writers, and it helps with their writing process as well. And that's why we have a lot of language materials in our primary classroom. And of course, that grows as we get into lower and upper L. Parts of a fish, parts of a horse. They learn all of these parts of, and now people are doing like parts of a pumpkin, and we want to expose them to all of that. And they use their absorbent mind to take that in. So we also want to offer like the essence of something and where things come from. So this can be a conversation. I always had this, with my own kids in the grocery store, especially in like the produce aisle. Okay, this is an avocado. Where do avocados grow? This doesn't just happen to be in the grocery store, right? Right. What parts of the world does it grow in? And why do you think it looks like this? And why does it have the shell and this pit? And, so that's sort of like the essence of something, and really explaining that to them, no matter how young they are. And the role of the adults also is to give them the freedom to interact with others. And again, our classrooms are set up for that. This can be sort of a new theory for some people. Back in the days, some families may have been like, okay, I'll let you know when to speak, or you don't speak unless spoken to. But we really should be giving the children freedom to interact with peers and interact with adults as well. Any questions on that? I'll read a little bit about what I have in my album. So it says the role of the adult is awareness, of course, like what we talked about, of the absorbent mind. We need to provide an environment which corresponds to their inner needs. We need to provide a rich environment. Rich meaning an environment that is physical and enables them to have a lot of movement. Talked about that. Rich meaning an environment that is physical. Exposing them to language, customs, and the essence of things helps them learn about the world around them. Tell them where things come from. Okay, like that. You need to offer the essence of something. The child needs freedom of movement to explore and understand the world around them. And when we think about babies, right, everything is sort of in the mouth. They're exploring, they're using their senses I'm going to pick this up and try to find out what the essence of this object is. They need freedom to interact with others. Adults need to have real conversations with children. We need to provide stimuli, but not overload them. Oftentimes we give our children, we tend to give our children a lot of items to play with, but Montessori sort of says, no, let's just give sort of a limited amount. So again, they can get to like that essence of something, if that makes sense. Because too much stimuli is not good. Let's see. Give them an opportunity to initiate an activity. Possibilities are there. We need to be cognizant of the way we learn, and then it differs, and of the way they learn, and then it differs from the way we learn. Living for them means learning. So just sort of existing as a child, and adults, right? We're learning every day. So the first 6 years is not replaceable, and no one else can do the self-construction for the child. Work is being done even when we don't see it. So even though they may be, we may not be picking up on that. The mind is always working and always absorbing. Any questions? Okay, I'm going to play this video. Oh, how can we know the appropriate amount of items? So I think the suggestion for that, once you start, I would say, depending on the age, I don't know, maybe 5 to 10 items, like for a child from like 1 to 3, and have them out, and then rotate it maybe once you start to see them losing interest in those items, if that makes sense. And then kind of rotating a new set in. So I would say 5 to 10 items is good. I think of like my son's closet, and it was too much. He never went in there because it was just too much. It's too much stimuli, right? But if I had it organized, which I did with my daughter, because that's when I went to Montessori training. If I had it, or when I had it organized right nicely for her, she played with everything, and I didn't need 500 things. So yeah, I think also maybe having a shelf or a dresser where you keep the toys, so they know where they are and have it, organization, a sense of order is also one of our human tendencies. So order is very important for our students. So having like a sense of order with their toys as well is good. Okay, I am going to stop presenting this, and I'm going to bring up the video. Hopefully it shall work.
First 3 years of life. From the ages of about 3 to 6, it transitions into a more conscious manner. But it needs to be unconscious because it's taking the burden off of the child to determine what it is they need to absorb from the environment to lay those foundations for the future. The child simply can't do that. The next characteristic is this effortless absorption. It will take in anything with ease. It does not take any effort on the part of the child to be taking quantities of information. Next, it's non-discriminatory. It cannot determine what is good information and what is bad information. It takes everything in. And often you'll hear it referenced like a sponge. A sponge will soak up whatever liquid it's placed onto. Doesn't matter if it's clean or not, it's going to be taken in. And the child's mind, this absorbent mind, is operating in the very same fashion. It cannot determine what is good quality information and what might not be the best quality information to be taking in. It's also global. Now, this means that it is taking in everything. Dr. Montessori used the analogy of a camera to describe how this works. The adult's mind is much like, let's say, a painter. A painter chooses a subject and puts very intentional effort on the details of that subject. And the background generally isn't as clear or detailed. For the child, their mind is much like a camera. Everything that is in front of that lens is absorbed with perfection, perfect clarity. Just like when you take a picture, everything is going to be in focus. This absorbent mind is self-creative. Everything that is taken in is allowing the child to take that information to create the person that they're going to be. It is also universal. Every child, regardless of race, gender, or where they live, has this gift. Every human being has this gift of the absorbent mind for those first 6 years of life. So we can see just by looking at these characteristics how powerful this is for every child and how it can affect their self-construction in very profound ways. Next, we're going to take a look at how this absorbent mind is operating in the first 6 years of life.
So, yeah, so what she was saying was sort of what we've been talking about. I loved the analogy of like the camera, right? And how every detail shows up. There's no discrimination in that. And I think that's a good analogy as opposed to like, the painting.
When I put it into the water, this sponge is no more dry. It's soaked up all the water. The young child's mind, the child from 0 to 6, his or her mind is just like this sponge, absorbing everything. And so today, that's what we're going to talk about. This is the first in a series called The Secrets of Montessori, and our topic for today is the absorbent mind. Think of your young child's mind, the child between the ages of 0 to 6, just like a sponge, absorbing everything around them. Just like when you put that sponge into the water, it takes in all that water. That's how their mind works in the first 6 years of life. Maria Montessori said that every child has this absorbent mind, and that's how he gains information through the environment. And this absorbent mind from 0 to 6 is actually split into 2 stages. We have 0 to 3, which is the stage of unconscious mind, and then we have 3 to 6, which is the stage of the conscious mind. So when we're talking about this unconscious mind stage, what we mean is that the child's mind hasn't fully formed yet. This is when all the information he's taking in from the environment around it, he does it without any actual choice or decision. Whatever's happening around him, it just goes in through his mind. This is what is creating the child. So he's absorbing whatever he sees, whatever he hears, whatever he feels, whatever he senses. Let me give you an example through which you'll be able to see what I mean. Now, I have a little nephew. When he was 18 months old, now he's about 8 or 9, but when he was 18 months old, he came over to play one day. And while he was, exploring my apartment, he found that broom that we used to clean the beds. And so he picked it up and he started sweeping all the beds. Now, think about this. Nobody has ever taught him how to do this, but he had obviously seen this happening and he knew what to do, and he was doing it as well as an 18-month to 2-year-old child could do it. So here's what's even more interesting for me. After he had finished sweeping the bed, he then bent down and he pulled up the bed cover and he started sweeping underneath the bed. Now think about that. Do you think anybody would have taught this 18-month-old boy to sweep under the bed, and he has to lift the covers to do that? That's obviously something that he had seen happening around his house. It's not something that somebody gave him a lesson, but in passing, he must have happened to be in the area when, it was being done, and he noticed that, and he kept that information. And so when he was placed in a situation where, he needed that kind of a skill, somewhere from his mind, he was able to pull that forward and repeat the action. Isn't that just amazing to you? Doesn't that make you think how wonderful is the child's mind? So that's how the unconscious mind works, taking everything in around you without really making a decision. Now at about 3 years, they enter the conscious state of the absorbent mind. This is around the time that they're coming to school as well, right? Through all the experience of the unconscious mind, the child has learned so much, and he's developed a memory, he's developed a sense of will. So now in the conscious stage, he makes decisions. He's deciding and choosing what he wishes to absorb. What this means is now he chooses, he will come, he will pick up something, he'll work with it, and that's how he will absorb the information. Different from before, where everything was just going out without any filter. So now he makes a decision. I want to work with this particular piece of material. He will pick it up, he'll work with it, he'll explore with it to his satisfaction. When he feels satisfied, he moves on to absorbing different information. This mind of the child between 0 to 6 is so amazing. They're absorbing so much information. If you had to put yourself in that place, with all your added maturity, we have to work so much harder to learn things than how they do, because their mind is absorbing it effortlessly. Let's take a moment to think about this from the viewpoint of a parent or a teacher. If this is how our child's mind is working, don't we want to immerse our child in wonderful experiences? In the first 3 years, they're responding most to adults, so you want to talk to them and say things to them and show them things that is going to be useful to them, that's going to help them learn. And when they're in that stage where they're in the conscious, give them activities that are going to stimulate them, that are going to excite them to learn. I hope you found this secret of Montessori interesting. Look out, keep following us, subscribe to our channel, because we're going to have more secrets coming your way. Every week we'll be revealing a new.
Okay, so she talked about, some things that we had talked about earlier as well. And I know Carmen had asked a question. I don't think she's on anymore, but she said, how can you discern the positive from the negative if the child isn't able to do so, right? In a way that doesn't discourage their exploration. So, when I think of like negative impressions of them absorbing from our environment, and that could be different in different cultures as well. Some people may drink around their children. Some people, may not. So what we think is, somebody may think as negative, other people may not. But certainly I think, violence is in general, not very good. We can see the children that are exposed to violence in their homes or in the environment. If they come into us and start, maybe hitting, those are things that they maybe have been exposed to. And as we had said, from 0 to 6, that personality is sort of already in place. So it takes a lot of work to sort of reverse that, because if that's what they're seeing in their environment, they of course have absorbed that indiscriminately. And so for us to say, no, that actually isn't, how do we say that isn't what you see, or that isn't normal? It takes a lot of work. So I guess using your own, aspects of what you think is negative and positive is probably the best advice for that. Okay. Thank you all so much.